right, so we have a special treat. We have Steve Posnack, who has joined us for the afternoon super keynote. And I know everybody here knows Steve. Is there anybody who does not know Steve? Well, okay. Well, if you don't know Steve, he is the Deputy National Coordinator for Health IT at ONC. And in that capacity, he directs ONC's overall mission alongside the national coordinator, including a diverse portfolio of policy, initiatives and technical investments across the U.S. executive branch and private sector. But what you may not know is that Steve is also coach and manager of the Posnack Orioles Youth Baseball League. Is that right? Yes. He was also interviewed by Diane Rehm for the booming high-tech health apps and wireless devices. Is that right? You met Diane? She wasn't in at the time, but you were on the Diane Rehm show. Okay, star quality. And then finally, in 2009, Federal Computer Week named Steve a rising star, something we all knew. And his dream job in non-health IT back in 2009 was to start and manage his own restaurant. So I want to know what kind of restaurant and if that's still your dream. So please join me in welcoming Steve.
Let this be a reminder that nothing is lost on the internet. So I have this idea to do a food truck now. It's called Parfait, but you spell fate, F-A-T-E, because I like to eat yogurt in the morning. And we have a bit of a food desert in the Federal Center Southwest area if you've been down to us, and there are lots of food trucks now, but there's nobody that does breakfast. So if you want to get in on a breakfast-related food truck, the opportunity is there for you. So, all right. The other thing is, I'm sorry to be the ONC official. I'm the ONC official here for you today. There's a note to self. Anytime an agenda says ONC official, I'm going to be the one that gets sent related to the work that we have. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being after lunch. I spoke another time at a different event, not for here, but elsewhere, where I was right before their networking and happy hour, and I think that's probably a worse spot in comparison to before lunch. So being before drinks is never a good spot to be in. The end of the year always brings an opportunity to reflect, but it also happens to be the end of a decade for all of us. And that prompts a broader look back across the horizon of the work that we've done. Since it is the holiday season, and I usually mix into my speaking remarks to keep things fresh, that you will be visited by 3 ghosts. And so I will cover the past, present, and future of what we're going to as a lead-in and kind of to get you going for Marianne and the rest of the afternoon. So the term governance is not unfamiliar to ONC, as I'm sure it is not unfamiliar to most of you. And in fact, it is one of the few activities that predates me at ONC, because I started in July 2005. So in 2004, the office, newly formed out of its primordial executive branch ooze, created a request for information on a broad range of topics related to interoperability, including nationwide network interoperability, and we received a number of comments. I'm sure some of you may still have stress from writing those comments back in 2004. Little did you know that you'd have so many more opportunities to write comments to us in the forthcoming years. But that then led off to the creation of the American Health Information Community, led by Secretary Levitt. That was ONC's first Federal Advisory Committee. For those of you that are keeping track, we're on number 4. Then we had what was called the Nationwide Health Information Network work, which we rebranded to the NWHIN, also referred to as NUHIN. There's nothing necessarily new about it. It was just the way that we chose to pronounce it. That had prototypes and trial implementations that ran from 2005 through 2009-ish. And that really led to, as many of you know, the eHealth Exchange as it exists today. And that was subsequently a first insight into how we can work together in a public-private way, federal agencies across the board, not just HHS, and move something into the private sector for a scale and larger driven activities. We established a cooperative agreement with what was the National eHealth Collaborative. So that was supposed to be the AHIC successor, if you remember that terminology, which actually got anchored in the HITECH Act of 2009. And the HITECH Act created the other two federal advisory committees that you knew for the better part of 8 years, which was the Health IT Policy Committee and the Health IT Standards Committee. It also created authority for the national coordinator to establish a governance mechanism for the nationwide health information network. And we took a few swings at that over the better part of the past decade. The largest of which was probably in 2012, and so I had to reach back, way back into the Wayback Machine, when we issued a request for information on what we referred to as conditions for trusted exchange. And so the terminology that we use is often repurposed and recycled into future-related work, right? So we were focused on conditions for trusted exchange. In 2012, we went through the request for information process. All of the feedback that you may remember was don't go forward with a regulatory approach, and we didn't. So that really ended that cycle of policy work in the area. And I would say, we dabbled, we invested in cooperative agreements with a few other groups, Direct Trust included, to spur additional activity as it was going on. This is still during the large burn of the high-tech related stimulus dollars, right? So we had lots of health information exchange activities, beacon communities, the regional extension centers. I have to avoid, as I'm sure some of you do, in saying REC versus RCE. That's a challenge that is unique to some of us in the acronym space. And then in 2016, as we fast forward, we have the Cures Act. So not too much longer after we took a pass at governance from a policy perspective, did Congress take another pass at governance from a policy perspective. And now all of the work that you're involved in is related to the Trusted Exchange, sounds familiar, framework and common agreement that the Sequoia Project is helping to lead with us. And we've been working on that basically ever since the Cures Act for the better part of the past 3 years now, almost, since we're coming up on the Cures Act's 3rd birthday, if you can believe it. So we've gone through a number of rounds of public comment, working on, and I'm going to expose or remind you of numerous acronyms that we've created, because no good government project can advance in a way that matures itself without having its own acronym speak and language and other things that we ask of people to memorize overall. So you might be thinking, why, after all of this, is something going to stick? We've been working on this for almost 15 years. What is different now? And I would say commitment, if I had to give one word. When I look across the time that we've spent related to the work that we've done, the policy shots that we've taken at the governance-related work, and what we have right now, it's not just commitment in terms of ONCs, it's everybody's commitment, especially given the size of the room. I know, I was talking with Michael, the size of the collective group that has attended this conference has increased year after year. The size of people attending the ONC annual meetings has increased year over year, including the interoperability forum that we do in the summer. So the collective commitment to making progress is really there in a way that it hasn't ever been. And so when we look at our successful efforts and the most successful out of them, the ones that organically accelerate innovation and growth, they have the right ratios of technology, policy clarity, and in that respect, there's two components. There's knowing where the hard lines are, and then also knowing explicitly in a clear way where there's flexibility. And that is one I would say from a reflection standpoint over the better part of 10 years doing regulatory work. It's not the hardline ones that are often that are the toughest to deal with. It's explaining where there's inherent flexibility in certain policies, and then working through those scenarios with stakeholders to make sure that they stay in line with the rules, but also can do what we think they should otherwise be able to do under those rules too. Now, as you know, TEFCA is not a regulatory instrument or vehicle, so that gives us a lot more flexibility to work with all of you in the community. But that is the one place that I wanted to stop on as the third ingredient to this overall ratio. So you have technology, you have policy, and then you have the community at large. And you need wide trust and buy-in from the community. And so now, more than ever, you can see that trust and buy-in across the entire industry landscape about who wants to see trusted exchange happen. And we believe that there is a high proportion of each of these, technology, policy, and community buy-in to make things move forward. So that was the opening monologue related to the slides that I will otherwise cover for you to give you a sense of how we're working on the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement with Sequoia, the RCE, as I shall now refer to them, and I'll just carry forward into some context setting. So this is a slide that you are, I'm sure, well familiar with. We've presented on this numerous times. We have a number of goals associated with the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement. The first one, which I would say has resonated most with the just general, let's say, lay stakeholder community. I'm sorry, but you're not part of the lay stakeholder community anymore because you're here. They don't want to connect to multiple networks in order to get access to the data that they should otherwise be able to. And it both creates an economic impact for these stakeholders as well as complexity overall related to how they engage in nationwide exchange. The second is an overall goal that all of us have expressed over time, that information is there, when and where you need it. And then the third is really, as we look at networks and successful networks as they've existed in other industries, you need nationwide scale to really achieve some of the economic benefits that we believe in and see forward into the future. All right, so how will the common agreement work? This is another slide that I'm sure is etched in many memory. This is the umbrella slide, I guess, if I had to give it a name. So we have the recognized coordinating entity, we have QHINs, and then we have the kind of substructure underneath that are part of the qualified health information networks. So the qualified health information networks, as you may know, are health information networks in general. We put the Q there because they participate and have signed on to the future version of the common agreement. And then you have the recognized coordinating entity, RCE, that provides the overall oversight and governance, that word again, that makes its way into how the qualified health information networks engage with one another and how to make sure that there are all the appropriate policies, guardrails. We often refer to this as rules of the road related to health information exchange nationwide. And then lastly, there are a variety of different stakeholders, as we've articulated, that may be a party to and participate with or be a member of a particular qualified health information network. And that's just the rough landscape of how we see this working out overall. Now, in order to make all those lines stay together, you need some structure, you need some common agreement to move forward. And that's where we get to acronyms that you will now all use in great fluency into the future. So the overall common agreement we've built out into two pieces largely. ONC has a more specific and direct role in what we call the MRTCs, which are the minimum required terms and conditions. And then we've established this cooperative agreement with the RCE in order to both advance the MRTCs as well as to give flexibility to the industry overall to identify what additional required terms and conditions need to be part of this overall trust agreement that we refer to as the common agreement, obviously, from statute. So that's the common agreement in that kind of teal, turquoise, green box there. And then the other component of it, as we all have had experience, and I'm sure many of you have been a party to data sharing agreements and the like, you don't want to mix technological requirements in detail with the legal agreements because both of those change and evolve at different paces and with different half-lives, so to speak. And so what we've done in response to your all's comments as a result of the first round of public comment that we received was to split out the detailed technical requirements, which we have put in a named document called the QHIN Technical Framework, and included some cross-references to those requirements in what would be the overall legal agreement, the common agreement, to create that linkage and traceability, but not to hamstring or tie any hands relative to technological evolution over time when the legal principles may not need to change. So that separation or modularity leads to an ability for us to be more nimble and to work with the community overall. All right, so what's next? We are continuing to work on, as I mentioned, the kind of principal role for ONC is to invest our time in the minimum required terms and conditions. This is what we've seen as we've described as kind of flattening out some of those wrinkles, filling in the gaps between the different health information exchange activities that exist today, and that's really where we can bring our weight to the process overall. The RCE is principally responsible for developing the ARTCs effectively from scratch, but we have some ideas, of that as well. But also providing input into the MRTCs, working with all of you through various means and public feedback. And so we'll continue to have iterative rounds in which we are able to get feedback from the community at large, not just those of you at this meeting, but also from the public overall. We will be working to publish a draft of the Common Agreement in 2020 with the ultimate goal, and I have the usual timeline slide for you, with the ultimate goal of having a Common Agreement version 1 out by the end or sometime in 2020, whenever that is mature. We will have additional public stakeholder meetings, largely run by the RCE, with our backing, and also any other types of public relations or notification that we need to do with our mouthpiece or amplification and platform. We will be doing that jointly with the RCE as well. So you have plenty of opportunities to participate. For your colleagues that weren't able to attend this meeting, definitely let them know that they have an opportunity to engage and be a part of the process throughout the rest of the year, or the forthcoming year, as it were. And we very much look forward to continuing our work with you all and the RCE to advance the Common Agreement. So the TEFCA timeline here, as I mentioned, a lot of it is now past history. You kind of fast forward to the right there, working toward a new version, a first version of the Common Agreement as a whole. So that's the minimum required terms and conditions, the additional required terms and conditions, and an updated QHIN technical framework as a result of all of the feedback that we received from the technical community in general. All right, that's it. My email address isn't a state secret, so it's up there if you want to get a hold of me, but I know many of you know how to get a hold of me anyway. I know Don always offers to have people contact him as well, and so we definitely have an open door and are would welcome any opportunity to chat with any of you on this topic or other topics, and thank you for your time. With a few minutes to spare. All right. So I think we're doing questions. I've subjected myself to that. And we have our first questioner.
Hi. So Common Agreement version 1, draft in production. I saw all those words on those slides. What does it mean to have a common agreement by the end of next year?
So I think from our perspective, we will have everyone's buy-in in what a first version of the Common Agreement would look like, and that they could implement and operationalize into soliciting QHINs to participate as from a full matter, and the Qualified Health Information Networks, I'll try not to mix too many of the acronyms, they need to know what the requirements are in order to be a Qualified Health Information Network. And so a lot of that's going to play out in the Common Agreement overall, because that's what they'll be signing. So in order for the next stage to happen, to really accelerate into the production deployment and overall scale of the Common Agreement overall, we want to make sure that we can get that in place as soon as possible, so that QHINs can then become QHINs, or HINs can become QHINs, if we want to be really specific. And then it's a matter of making sure that any of the requirements that would need to flow down to their participant members and things of that nature would get worked out in the appropriate time. But we would like to see, we've talked about it, it's been 3 years since the Cures Act. There are a number of areas where we've made steady progress. This is one of them. But the proof will be in the pudding, so to speak, in terms of really seeing Common Agreement driven nationwide exchange, or Common Agreement supported nationwide exchange in the coming years. Far side. Jamie, how's it going?
Hi, Steve. How are you? Thanks for coming in today and subjecting yourself to my softball question.
I say that as a term of endearment.
Yeah.
And you only throw curveballs, so.
That's not true. Some of them are fastballs.
Yes.
Okay. So, but it's about the business case. So, today, more than 3/4 of doctors and over 98% of hospitals in the U.S. are already connected to networks. Those networks are interconnecting through care equality. And so, from the perspective of all the current participants in all those networks, which is most of us, it's all cost and what's the benefit? So tell me about what's the business case for going through all this compared to what we already have?
Sure, and I think it's a good opportunity. We've always had as a principle to build on the progress that everyone has made and to make sure that we are accelerating and advancing the efforts that all of you have invested in thus far. There are a few areas where, as we've gone through the public comment opportunities, as we did our assessment early on in developing the first versions that we solicited public comment on, that we saw variances in how some of the different networks approached certain policy requirements as well as certain technical requirements. And I think there's some benefit to getting a common agreement, for lack of better words, on a few of the areas where there seems to be an opportunity to reach a level understanding of where health information exchange can occur at a broader perspective. The other economic benefit that we see is greater scale in some cases, and notwithstanding the immense progress that all of you have made in around the room, there's an opportunity across many of the networks, and I think we've started to see that, and that's what I wanted to get back to in terms of my earlier point around the community and the commitment. The linkage between common well care quality, you wouldn't have necessarily predicted when first were born, but that's a great improvement over time that I would say has shown a lot toward everyone's commitment to making nationwide exchange happen. So as we look at the business cases that are available, there are a few exchange purposes that we've proposed to include as part of the minimum required terms and conditions that are in or out of certain agreements, and we think if there are a level set, a minimum set of exchange purposes overall, that will help with nationwide exchange and some of the economic benefits that everyone would be able to receive. Another question.
Hey, Steve. First of all, I have to say I'm very disappointed that you haven't made any TEFCA puns. But my question is, what is, as you see it, incentives for QHINs to become QHINs? There seems like a lot of responsibility, but what's the golden ticket, I guess?
Sure, you get a Q in front of your HIN. No, not. As much as the letter might be worth to someone. I mean, I think there is a certain opportunity for health information networks to separate themselves in terms of meeting, the requirements that would be in the common agreement. There is a certain set of requirements, given that this is supposed to be a trusted exchange framework and common agreement. We often say, information moves at the speed of trust and kind of other sayings like that. To the degree, and all of us, I think, have grown a greater sensitivity to this in the better part of the past year or two, where there are broader privacy and security concerns, the more that we can provide the general public, who in some cases think this exists already, and in other cases may have significant concerns about their health information being exchanged in a broader way. Going through this very deliberate public process to get lots of input can provide, I think, greater certainty around the value of the information exchange that people are engaged in. We have to work, obviously, with a number of rules, some of which exist, like the HIPAA privacy and security rules and breach rules, and then some of which will be, coming forward in the future, like the information blocking related rules, that all create incentives in one way or the other for information to move. It's just a matter of how that can be done in the most efficient manner possible in a way that's, private and secure, as we would say as well. The value proposition, I would say, for a QHIN to step forward is because they think they can drive nationwide exchange across the nation. We have lots of areas of success, but we'd like to see that scale, like we talked about for Goal 3, and that's what we think we can realize out of the QHINs. Other questions?
Hi, Steve. To what extent do you see the consumer as one of the users at the bottom of the chart? And will the QHINs have a direct role to play with the consumers?
So this is definitely an area where we've had lots of discussion and lots of feedback from our stakeholders. Certainly individual users as maybe, may have been portrayed. I don't know if you all got see, I can work the slides backwards and forwards here. Individual users are noted there at the bottom. So we are looking for opportunities for patients and caregivers along those lines to have a participatory role in the benefits of the network overall. And that's another dynamic, as I'm sure you heard from Dr. Rucker this morning, getting all of us as patients and caregivers access to our data to be in control of our healthcare is really important to us. And we are looking at ways through all of the policy vehicles that we have, including the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, to do that.
Hi, Steve. Thanks very much for your putting up with all of us again. So my interest is in understanding what happens now in some ways. I know that there's some things that we can't talk about, but TEFCA is not rulemaking, so there's sort of a different set of rules. I'm not really quite sure what those rules are. So the specific question I have is around the QTF. So I get the sense that this convening here, the RCE itself, is going to have a lot to do with hardening the MRTCs and establishing the ARTCs, as that's what is defined in all rules. But what seems really unclear is can we expect this group, this convened group, to be involved in creating the new QTF, or will there be no QTF, or will there be a further drop of a version 3 of TEF that has a new QTF attached?
Sure, happy to clarify for that too. So the RCE has as one of its responsibilities to pick up where we would say like we left off with the QHIN technical framework. The one other thing that I want to clarify since I have the opportunity as well is when we did the separation, which was part of this last round of full public comment that ONC led, we separated the legal and technical requirements out of the first draft that all of you commented on, which is one of your comments, and that yielded this QHIN technical framework as we've so named it. When we looked at the equivalent minimum required terms and conditions, because that's what we were working on at the time, we looked to map those or crosswalk them to the available technical specifications that existed out in the industry. They weren't necessarily meant to prescribe this is the way that we think health information exchange should be done. It was more of a reflection of here's how we understand that health information exchange is taking place today for these terms and conditions, these exchange purposes. Let us know if we've got that right, because that'll help us work with the RCE in the next round. Equally, let us know if you think there's a new opportunity to leapfrog or leap ahead in terms of the specifications that are available for QHINs to interact, in this future world. So I think every time we put something out, sometimes it's misinterpreted as like, this is the way it has to be done. And we've always tried to message with the QHIN technical framework that it was an opportunity to get feedback in as a lead-in to the next round of what the QTF or whatever it may need to be named later with the RCE. So the RCE is now in charge of leading the QHIN technical framework related work, and that will be a part of the overall public engagement going forward.
Hey Steve, this is Arun from Davita. So quick question on unintended consequences, at least in the short term with QHINs, right? I mean, I think to an earlier question with care quality and e-health, there is a certain aggregation that has happened already. So do you see some type of disaggregation in the short term? Just to give you an example, state HIEs moving out of e-health exchange to become QHINs in the future. So I kind of see some opportunity for short-term disaggregation. Maybe in the long term it will sort it out, but what are your thoughts on that?
So we've had this is an interesting question because we've had this conversation numerous times in the office. We don't have, and I think we've stated this from the beginning, we don't have a predicted or set number of QHINs that we expect to exist. Based on the requirements, as per the earlier question, and the responsibility and scale at which the exchange of health information would occur vis-a-vis the QHINs, it's not something just organically from an industry perspective that we would expect to see, hundreds. But we're open to whatever the market, whatever's the right fit for the market. So, I mean, in cases where we know that there are, I like to call them super HINs, and maybe that's the only pun I can provide at the moment right now, where there are health information networks today that are in a particular geography or region or anything else, and they want to step up to provide a broader suite of services, and go beyond their normal boundaries today, they may decide that being a QHIN is the next step for them as a business line, and that's growth. So I think we will probably see a little bit of shift here and there, but again, we want to support the market in the direction that it's already moving. So we hope that the current organizations that are already providing effectively QHIN services will find a route to become QHINs very quickly, and will be able to stand up, TEFCA-based exchange in as shortest time as possible. I may have exhausted the questions now at this point. That wasn't a solicitation for more questions, though. All right, and Dave's going to cover the QHIN technical framework? All right. I know you're next. I know you're not next, but you're going to do that later. All right, yeah. So you'll get more QTF later. Plenty of QTF. All right. Thanks very much.